There is a pilot program running right now in 30 American cities, quietly testing technology that will fundamentally transform the relationship between you and your money. And most people have no idea it is happening because the Federal Reserve and the Treasury Department have been careful to call it a research project, an exploration of possibilities, a way to modernize the financial system for the 21st century. But the infrastructure being built is not theoretical or experimental. It is operational and scalable and designed to replace the cash in your wallet and the deposits in your bank account with a new form of money that exists only as entries in a government database, money that can be programmed to expire if not spent by a certain date, money that can be restricted so you cannot buy certain products or services, money that can be turned off completely if you say something the government does not like or associate with people they consider dangerous or simply fail to comply with regulations you never knew existed. This is not science fiction. This is not paranoid speculation. This is the stated goal of central bank digital currency programs in dozens of countries around the world. And while American officials use softer language and talk about financial inclusion and reducing transaction costs, the technical capabilities they are building are identical to those being deployed in China, where the digital yuan already allows the government to track every purchase, every transfer, every financial interaction of over 100 million users, and to cut off access for anyone who steps out of line. But the transition to digital currency will not happen because people choose it or demand it. It will happen because a crisis makes it seem necessary. Because the old system appears to be failing and the new system is presented as the only solution that can restore stability and prevent chaos. And if you look at how governments have historically used emergencies to expand power and eliminate freedoms, you can see exactly how this will unfold over the next 18 months. The groundwork has already been laid through years of preparation, executive orders signed, pilot programs launched, partnerships formed with major banks and technology companies, international coordination agreements reached with other central banks. All of it happening in plain sight, but reported in technical language that most people find too boring to pay attention to. And that is deliberate, because the worst way to impose a surveillance system is to announce it clearly and give people time to organize resistance. Much better to build it piece by piece, to normalize each component before the next one arrives, to make it seem inevitable and beneficial until suddenly one day you wake up and realize that every aspect of your financial life is monitored and controlled, and there is no way back to the freedom you once had. The historical precedent that should terrify every American is Executive Order 6102, signed by President Franklin Roosevelt on April 5th, 1933. Which made it illegal for citizens to own gold and required them to turn in their gold coins. Goldi bullion, and gold certificates to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper dollars at a fixed price of $20.67 per ounce, and anyone who refused faced 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, which in 1933 was an enormous sum equivalent to over $200,000 today. The official justification was that hoarding gold was preventing economic recovery during the Great Depression, that people needed to spend money and trust the banking system rather than hiding wealth in precious metals. But the real reason was that Roosevelt wanted to devalue the dollar against gold, to inflate the money supply and reduce the real value of debts. And he could not do that while citizens had the option to hold gold instead of dollars. So he confiscated the gold and then immediately revalued it to $35 per ounce, effectively stealing 40% of the wealth from everyone who had complied with the order. And this remained illegal for American citizens until for decades, during which the government maintained a monopoly on gold ownership and used inflation to steadily erode the purchasing power of the dollars they had forced people to accept. The parallel to digital currency is exact. The government cannot fully control a financial system where people can use cash, where transactions happen peer-to-peer without intermediaries, where you can store value under your mattress or in a safe deposit box or simply carry it in your pocket. Because cash is anonymous and untraceable and outside the digital surveillance apparatus that monitors everything else, and as long as cash exists, people have an escape valve, a way to opt out of the banking system if they distrust it or disagree with how it operates. But once cash is eliminated and all money exists only in digital form on government-controlled ledgers, that escape valve disappears. Every transaction becomes visible to authorities. Every account can be frozen or seized with a key, and the money itself can be programmed to enforce rules that the government decides without needing your consent or even your knowledge. This is not a hypothetical future. This is the explicit design of central bank digital currencies as described in technical papers from the Bank for International Settlements, the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and dozens of other institutions that are building these systems right now. The crisis that will trigger the transition is already being engineered, though whether by intention or incompetence is almost irrelevant because the result will be the same. The regional bank failures in March of 2023, where Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank collapsed within 48 hours and required emergency intervention to prevent contagion, demonstrate how fragile the current system has become after 15 years of near-zero interest rates and quantitative easing inflated asset bubbles throughout the economy. And while those particular failures were contained through government guarantees that went beyond the normal FDIC insurance limits, the underlying problems were not solved. They were papered over with more liquidity and more promises that the system is safe, but it is not safe. There are hundreds of small and medium-sized banks holding long-term bonds and commercial real estate loans that have lost 30 or 40% of their value as interest rates rose. And these losses are hidden on balance sheets through accounting rules that allow banks to pretend everything is fine until depositors start withdrawing money and force them to sell assets at market prices, at which point the losses become real and the bank fails. The next wave of failures, which could begin anytime there is economic stress or loss of confidence or simply bad news about a major institution, will be larger and faster and more contagious than what happened in 2023. And when it comes, the government will face a choice between letting the entire banking system collapse, which is politically impossible, or guaranteeing all deposits at all banks, which would require creating trillions of dollars and would raise immediate questions about moral hazard and fairness, and how the government can possibly afford such guarantees when it is already running massive deficits. This is when the digital dollar will be introduced, not as a new form of money, but as an emergency measure to protect depositors, to ensure that everyone has access to their funds regardless of whether their bank survives, because central bank digital currency accounts are liabilities of the Federal Reserve itself, and therefore carry the full faith and credit of the United States government in a way that even FDIC insurance does not. The messaging will be carefully crafted to sound reasonable and protective. Officials will appear on television and explain that your money is safe, that you can access it through a new digital wallet provided by the government, that this is temporary until the banking system stabilizes, but in the meantime, you should transfer your funds to ensure they are protected. And most people will comply because the alternative, leaving money in a failing bank, seems too risky. And once the transfer happens, once the majority of deposits have moved from commercial banks to central bank accounts, the transition is effectively complete because commercial banks will no longer have the funding they need to make loans, and the Federal Reserve will become the only institution capable of creating credit, which means the only institution that decides who gets loans and who does not, who can start a business and who cannot, who can buy a house and who must rent. This concentration of power in a single institution, accountable to no one except political appointees, represents the end of financial freedom as Americans have known it for the entire history of the country. If you are feeling the weight of what this means, if you are starting to understand that the freedom to use your money as you choose is about to disappear and be replaced by a system where every dollar you earn comes with conditions and surveillance, then you are seeing what most people refuse to acknowledge. And if you want to know what happens next, how they will enforce compliance and what resistance will look like and whether there is any way to protect yourself, then subscribe now, because what comes next is even darker. A detailed look at the technical capabilities they are building and the legal frameworks they are preparing and the timeline they are following. And once you see the full picture, you will understand why summer of 2026 is not a random date, but a carefully calculated deadline. The programmable nature of central bank digital currency is what makes it fundamentally different from any form of money that has existed before. Because while cash and bank deposits can be restricted through laws and regulations and enforcement actions, digital currency can be restricted automatically through code that executes without human intervention or oversight. Imagine money that expires after 3 months if not spent, creating artificial scarcity and forcing consumption even when saving would be more prudent, or money that can only be used for approved purchase, preventing you from buying firearms or alcohol or cryptocurrency or gold or airline tickets to countries the government considers or money that is geo-fenced, so you cannot spend it more than 50 miles from your registered address without special permission, or money that is rationed based on your carbon footprint or social credit score or vaccination status or any other criteria that programmers decide to include in the smart contracts that govern how the currency functions. Every one of these capabilities has been discussed in technical papers and pilot programs. They are not theoretical possibilities, but actual features that are being tested and refined right now. The Chinese digital yuan already implements many of these features with expiration dates on stimulus, payments to encourage spending, geographic restrictions on where currency can be used, and integration with the social credit system so that people with low scores face limits on their ability to purchase certain goods or services. And while Western officials say they would never implement such controls, the technical architecture they are building is identical, which means the capability exists regardless of current policy, and capabilities have a way of being used once they exist, especially during emergencies when normal constraints on government power are suspended. The COVID pandemic demonstrated how quickly Western democracies can adopt authoritarian measures when they believe circumstances require it, from lockdowns and business closures to vaccine mandates and travel restrictions. All implemented with minimal legislative debate and sustained for years despite growing evidence that costs outweighed benefits. And if they are willing to restrict physical movement and economic activity based on public health rationales, why would they hesitate to restrict financial activity based on national security or climate change or social stability or whatever justification seems compelling at the moment? The legal framework for implementing digital currency without congressional approval already exists through multiple channels. Executive orders can invoke emergency powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act or the Trading with the Enemy Act, both FW. Give the president sweeping authority to regulate financial transactions during declared emergencies, and there is always an emergency, whether real or manufactured, that can justify extraordinary measures. Bank regulators can require financial institutions to facilitate digital currency as a condition for maintaining their charters and access to Federal Reserve services, creating de facto mandates without passing new laws, and the Federal Reserve itself can simply announce that it is launching a digital dollar as part of its mandate to maintain financial stability and provide an elastic currency, daring Congress to stop them, and knowing that most members of Congress will not understand the implications until it is too late to reverse course. This is how major policy changes happen in the modern administrative state. Not through democratic deliberation and legislative process, but through agency action and executive fiat and coordination between unelected officials who face no consequences if their decisions prove disastrous. The timeline for implementation has been carefully planned. The pilot programs running now through mid-2025 will provide the data needed to scale up infrastructure and identify technical problems. Then a crisis, whether organic or engineered, will create the political conditions for rapid deployment. And by summer of 2026, the system will be operational with incentives or requirements that push the majority of Americans into digital currency accounts within months. The incentives might include higher interest rates on digital currency holdings compared to bank deposits, or stimulus payments that are only available in digital form, or tax benefits for using the new system. And the requirements might include mandates that government payments like Social Security or federal salaries must be received in digital currency, or that businesses above a certain size must accept digital currency as payment, or that banks must convert deposits to digital currency above a certain threshold. Once a critical mass of money flows into the new system, network effects take over and holdouts face increasing costs and inconvenience until resistance becomes effectively impossible for anyone who wants to participate in the formal economy. The international coordination around central bank digital currencies reveals that this is not a national policy choice, but a global agenda being driven by institutions that operate above the level of individual governance. The Bank for International Settlements, which serves as a central bank for central banks and coordinates monetary policy across countries, has published dozens of papers outlining how CBDC should be designed and implemented and how cross-border transactions should be handled to ensure that digital currencies from different countries can interoperate seamlessly. This is crucial because if digital currencies could not cross borders, their utility would be limited and alternative systems might develop. But if they can move frictionlessly between countries while maintaining government surveillance and control in both the sending and receiving nations, then the entire global financial system can be brought under a unified monitoring and enforcement regime for the first time in history. The implications for freedom and privacy are staggering, because it means there would be nowhere to hide, no jurisdiction where you could escape, financial surveillance, no way to move money or conduct business without leaving a permanent record that can be accessed by any government with the appropriate agreements and technology in place. Do you understand what you are about to lose? Do you grasp that the cash in your wallet and the ability to make anonymous transactions and the option to save money outside the banking system are not minor conveniences, but fundamental bulwarks against tyranny? because history shows that governments with unlimited power to monitor and control financial activity use that power to suppress dissent and enforce conformity and punish anyone who threatens the established order. This is not paranoia. This is documented fact from every authoritarian regime that has ever existed. And the technology being built right now gives governments capabilities that Stalin and Hitler and Mao could only dream of. The ability to track every transaction, to freeze accounts instantly, to program money so it can only be used in approved ways, and to do all of this automatically without judges or due process or any of the protections that are supposed to constrain government power in free societies. The defenders of central bank digital currency will say that you have nothing to fear if you have nothing to hide, that only criminals and tax evaders oppose financial transparency, that the benefits of reducing fraud and money laundering and terrorism financing outweigh the costs of privacy. But this argument has always been dishonest because it assumes that governments only use surveillance powers against people who deserve it, when in reality, governments use surveillance against political opponents and activists and journalists and anyone who challenges their authority. We know this because it has been documented repeatedly from COINTELPRO and the Church Committee revelations about FBI and CIA abuses, to the Snowden disclosures about NSA mass surveillance, to the IRS targeting scandal where government agencies used their power to harass political groups they disagreed with. And every time these abuses are exposed, officials apologize and promise reforms, and then do the same thing again as soon as public attention moves elsewhere. Why would anyone trust these same institutions with even more invasive surveillance tools and the ability to control access to money itself, which is the foundation of everything else in a modern economy? The path to resistance is narrow and closing rapidly, because once the system is fully operational, opting out will mean giving up access to the formal economy, unable to receive payments from most employers, unable to pay taxes or utility bills or mortgages through normal channels, unable to buy goods online or from major retailers that have integrated digital currency systems, effectively relegated to a gray market existence that becomes more difficult and restricted as the transition progresses. This is why the critical moment is now, before the crisis hits and before the infrastructure is fully deployed, when there is still time to demand that Congress prohibit or strictly limit central bank digital currencies, to move money into assets that cannot be confiscated or controlled remotely, to build parallel economic networks that can function outside the digital surveillance system, and to educate others about what is coming so that resistance is broad enough to have political impacts. But most people will not do this because the threat seems distant or unlikely, because they trust that governments would never abuse such power, because they value convenience over freedom and cannot imagine living without the digital systems they have become dependent on. And so they will sleepwalk into digital currency when it is offered as the solution to the next crisis. And they will not realize what they have given up until it is too late to get it back. If this has fundamentally changed how you see the future, if you recognize now that digital currency is not progress, but prison, not innovation, but control, not the next evolution of money, but the end of financial freedom, then you need to watch what we reveal next, because the agenda extends far beyond currency into every aspect of life that can be digitized and monitored and controlled. Subscribe now, turn on notifications, and prepare yourself, because the system being built is total in its ambition and ruthless in its execution, and the only question is whether enough people will resist before it becomes operational and irreversible, or whether we will simply accept our digital chains because they were introduced gradually and wrapped in language about safety and efficiency and modernization, and by the time we understand what we have lost, it will be too late to fight back, because they will control our ability to buy and sell and save and spend and survive in an economy where everything requires their permission and their surveillance and their approval.